Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch, and of course, welcome back to you too, Ben Kingsley. How are you?
Mate, favourite time of the week. Talk property, talk shop. I love it. So thanks. Yeah, it's always fun.
Well, mate, I'm excited today. We got, besides your good self, we've got another heavyweight of the industry coming on, which is good. So we get to get some insights. But before we get to our very special guest, Ben, I want to talk today about, we've got a course that we're launching that's coming up, and I've been very grateful for a lot of people that have been writing in for some of the reviews, Ben, on because what we're going to do is read a few out, and then people can get access to that course in advance of us launching it. But I just want to check, mate, today, just so that people know that we're balanced. I hope you've bought your big boy pants and maybe a bit of your thick skin, because I'm not just going to read out 5-star reviews today, Ben. I'm going to read out a 2 and a 3-star. Are you okay with that?
Oh, I think I can handle a bit of constructive criticism, Bryce.
All right, here we go. First one, 2-star. And the subject heading of the review, Ben, is smoke and mirrors. And this is by the Door Train. A pair of elitists disguising as the common man, cross-promoting their own business and pretending they understand hardship while talking up a falling property market to benefit their own investments. Nearly had me fooled, lads. Ben, are we elitists?
Oh, look, I mean, it's for other people to make that opinion, but it's the first time I've heard it. But yeah, look, I mean, each to their own.
Well, let's go through the facts. We both went to public schools, mate. We both drive humble cars. I mean, my story last week, I've gone from a BMW to a Kia. So, Ben, I certainly downgraded from my European car. Look, hey,
if we do come across that way, it's not our intention. So I suppose that's probably the better way to put it. We love to teach and educate and serve and pay it forward. We've been very fortunate in our personal lives and our professional lives, and so we dedicate this time. We don't raise money through advertising or any other means. We try and do what we do. We've got a free portal that costs us over $500,000 a year to build and maintain and develop. So I think from that point of view, if that's someone who's elitist or has an agenda, then I'm sorry.
Well, here's the thing, Ben. So, we're open to all forms of feedback, and we've had plenty along the journey, including me learning and growing from some of that feedback. So that's fine. We're well and truly open to it. He talked about cross-promoting their own business. We go to a lot of lengths to not cross-promote our business, but during the height of the pandemic, we did interview our buyer's agents, Ben.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I did think about that at the time as to was that potentially crossing the line, because we talk about it being not about our business, but the idea was to create a war room environment so people could see what was actually happening on the ground at the time. So I guess if that has been true.
And I don't want to stop doing that from time to time, Bryce. I mean, these are the people who are executing day in, day out, whether it be our property investment advisors, our mortgage brokers, whatever that looks like. We will provide more and more education with those subject matter experts in there. I mean, the fact of the matter is, we're tracking up to 6,000 clients being serviced. So these people are doing their subject matter skill, and we see value in that. So as much as this is the first time we've sort of been singled out for self-interest. So be it.
So, folks, we're open to that. So there you go. That was a 2-star review from the Door Train. So if the Door Train is still listening to us, Ben, please reach out to us, info@the Property Couch, and we will send you access to the course if that's something that you want to have access to. We're more than happy to do that.
For free, the next one, by the way, for free. Just let them know it's for free.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you bet it'll be for free. This one's a 3-star, Ben. So you still got your thick skin on?
Yep.
All right. The title of the review is Good But Has Serious Issues. And this is by Kite 203933. And this was effectively a week and a bit ago, Ben. Very good property podcast overall. I'm thinking, all right, good start. Main problem is excessive non-property economic commentary despite a lack of credentials and deep understanding of the topic. In addition, ought to take more of a holistic view of the industry, e.g., very pro-mass immigration during a recession, which harms job opportunity of locals, drives down wages growth, increases congestion and environmental degradation. Most importantly, isn't affordable housing at a non-inflated price good for the average Australian who can't afford purchasing basic housing? Ben, good, but has some serious issues.
Yeah, I think this is the debate around broader economic trickle-down theory. I'm not a subscriber to that. It's fair to say that I'm a student of economics, as is everyone else who tries to forecast and read and commentate on those matters. 25 years of doing what I've been doing. Studied business, accounting, economics. So I think from that point of view, you can't actually study an economist degree, so to speak. And I'm certainly do not want to paint myself as an economist. I'm a commentator in this space, as are a lot of journalists or people who play in this space, and a lot of stockbrokers and the like haven't necessarily got themselves a qualification outside of what they're doing. So you can take my views, my forecasts, my recommendation as a grain of salt. That's fine. But I'll keep doing them because most of the time I've been reasonably accurate in terms of how I've been forecasting and reading the market. So we'll see how that plays out. But on that point, I mean, yeah, look, there are people who feel that their situation may be dire, and the challenges of getting to affordable housing and all that are real. There are some challenges. I've documented those and recognised those as well. But making the average property cheaper for everyone and stopping aspiration in the midst to do that, I'm not necessarily a subscriber to that's going to improve the overall standard of living and quality of life in this country. I think the core fundamentals of values around, work hard, reap what you sow, get a great education, have an optimistic outlook on the world will bode for a better community in the long run, as opposed to expecting your governments to look after you or support you, or to stop the wheels of commerce, or to regulate a marketplace for people to play in. I'm more of a fan of an open market than a closed market.
It comes down to standard of living, doesn't it, Ben? We enjoy this wonderful standard of living that comes at a cost, because if we're in a global marketplace, it's actually cheaper in other places to get manufacturing and all those sorts of things that we need. So it really is a way that we can still stay the lucky country, still enjoy the lifestyle that we do, but make that sustainable over time so that we can continue to enjoy that lifestyle that we enjoy over time as well. But hey, Kite, that's okay. You're well and truly welcome to your opinion. And if you reach out to us, we will give you access to that course as well.
Can I just make a point on that, Bryce, just to finish off, because it's the first time I've heard it. What's pleasing about that is that he's providing his feedback and views, and he's open-minded to listening to the content that we're producing and making an assessment on that. I listen to podcasts that have contrary views of what's happening in the marketplace and have forecasts and predictions that are far severer than my views on the world, because I've also got to try and find understanding in the data and understanding in terms of what my position is, and I'm not saying we'll always get it right or I'll always get it right, but what I do say to people, it comes back to that great commentary from Abraham Lincoln, who said, I need to get to know, I don't understand that person, I don't understand their views, I need to get to know them better so I can understand their views. But if you're a die-hard, in the trenches believer of a certain ideology or theory or thesis, and you aren't open-minded to listening to an alternative argument, that's where we go wrong. And that's where our society will go wrong as well. The answers are always in the middle. I've said that before. With anything in terms of open market, there still needs to be some regulation in there to protect those most vulnerable. There always needs to be a safety net to protect the most vulnerable. But we don't want a society that has expectations on others to provide their livelihood or their well-being. That's a society that can potentially be challenged over the long run because people get a little bit lazy and a little bit comfortable. And when we're competing in a global economy, being comfortable and in business and in life, if you're comfortable, you're not learning, you're not excelling, you're not growing. So that was always my view, that you need that competitive tension to continue to keep being the best you can be and developing our best and brightest through the educational program that we offer in this country and the opportunity for prosperity in this country. I think that's fair and reasonable.
So Ben, 2-star review was about smoke and mirrors. 3-star review was about good but has serious issues. So let's change gears. So 5-star Ben, the name of the review is Marriage Saver, which is pretty exciting, by Soph Marie J. Thanks, Bryce and Ben. You literally saved my marriage. My husband is using your Money Smart system, and we have finally turned our finances around, and we are nearly ready to purchase our first investment property. He even sold his, Ben, in inverted commas, his investment car. That definitely wasn't an investment, in brackets. Yes, with 3 exclamation marks. Loving the books and the weekly podcast, Life Changes. Thanks so much to the Property Couch team. Now, Ben, I want to give you a little bit of insight here as to why I chose. It's because they talked about the team, because we are a team here.
We are.
But I'm super excited that it's been a marriage saver, Ben, I've got to say. So if Soph Marie wants to reach out to us, we'll give you access. And the last one here, Ben, is the TPC hold the property premiership. All right. So by Nicole Oates. To B1, B2 and Stiggy, I've listened to your podcast from inception and totally addicted to it, using many of my saved episodes as my go-to reference source. I've been a property tragic for years, going to all the seminars by the gurus and sharks, investing in loads of books and courses, but still managed to make many mistakes along the way. Only now, after your podcast, books and Money Smarts, do I feel I have a solid foundation and understanding of the big picture. It is your sound and logical perspective that provides a refreshing and inspiring view of the entire industry and the overall status of the economy. Your mission and campaign to educate us all, to ultimately provide a better future for our families that in turn benefits the whole community, is absolute gold. Congratulations to the team. Ben. So there you go, folks.
Yeah. Wonderful. I mean, they're the things that inspire us.
Absolutely.
We've always said that we're pretty clear on purpose, not only here, but also in what we do in our business, and that's financial transformation, because we have an unwavering belief, irrespective of income, irrespective of status, where you are, that there is no doubt that you can improve your financial situation. Doesn't have to be through property, but just through basic money management, and then good savings mentalities, and then moving forward, and then potentially starting to build that nest egg. That's what gets us up. That's what gets us on this podcast. And without the work and support of all of the people that support you and I, Bryce, we couldn't do it. So, we're forever appreciative of those, and we're forever appreciative of the community that pass on what we're trying to achieve, and hopefully act on the information that we put out there to improve their circumstances.
It's a legacy piece, Ben. There's the do-it-yourself crowd who will never come and walk into our building, that we still can make an impact, and that's really what the podcast is about, because we can reach them. So there you go, folks.
We love the feedback. Keep it coming. We do read it. We try and improve where we don't get it wrong. We've had a few episodes where we haven't got it right. We've corrected those. We're still two bullfeds having a yarn about property and life and mindset and money.
There's even some feedback about people want us to bring back the footy banter, Ben. I wonder if...
Well, in a couple of weeks, you never know.
Yeah, who would have thought that many people write and say just drop the footy banter. Good to get something to do. Okay, Ben, the other thing we want to talk about today is the hashtag that we flagged last week that was an idea of yours. Oz Property Alive. Oz is OZ. I was watching that over the weekend. It's interesting to see that people are starting to use that, Ben. And it's a very, very graphic picture paints 1,000 words, doesn't it? And to see the lines that are forming at some of these properties have been really powerful.
Yeah, I enjoyed having a look on Saturday night and seeing some of the posts that were up there and all of the different people socially distancing and queuing up. And I suspect this weekend will be even better with the increased number of auctions and public opens that we're seeing as the market opens from being dormant. So yeah, I'm excited to see that hashtag trending across Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and also LinkedIn.
So for folks, just for clarity, if you're out this weekend, real estate agents, whilst you're seeing all the people lining up outside your properties, if you could take a photo and then hashtag Oz Property Alive, but also to buyers. But if they're in a line and they've got to wait and they want to pull out their phones and take a snap and see how long the queue is that they're in, make sure you use that same hashtag. So I think it's really great, and it gives us all across the community an opportunity to see what's actually happening at the coalface, which is the power of social media, which you haven't been able to do, Ben, in previous downturns like this.
Correct. So I think it's going to be just a nice representation of truth in terms of what's happening in the field.
Well done, mate. Very good. Hey, my mindset minute today, Ben, is I just want to quickly talk about a frame around what success is, right? Because we always talk about being successful and how do we be successful and what actually is an indicator of success. And upon reflecting on this, I think that if you're pursuing success, it's often what is it that you're defining that you're a success? Whereas if you reframe that and pursue adding value, if you pursue the mission and the purpose of adding value, I think that success becomes a derivative of that. So
love it.
I guess if the more successful you are is a measure of how much value you've created and how much value you've given in whatever endeavor. So I think about that in the context of us here using those bit of feedback as a catalyst. Our goal is to try and provide as much value as we can. We've tried to give as much as we possibly can on this podcast. So if we can measure our success by what value people are getting, that is something tangible to you and I. It's something that we can benchmark, and it's something that we can feel really proud about. So I was reflecting on that, and I was kind of thinking, for a lot of people who are chasing success, it's a bit like a butterfly. Once pursued, it's often just out of reach. But if you just sit quietly, you'll find that it might just even land on your shoulder. It's a bit like that. If I pursue adding value and more value, if that's me providing value to a tenant, making sure I'm providing the best opportunity for enjoyable living that I can, whatever it is, if I just continue to focus on value add, success becomes a derivative of it, and therefore it becomes the result. So just wanted to do a little.
I like that, mate. And I think you'll find everything you just said also would then have a correlation into happiness as well, wouldn't it? I mean, if you're paying it forward, if you give others what they want, you'll get what you. I mean, I just love that. It's a really tight message. Nice, and well said.
Oh, thank you, mate. Hey, I'm excited today to introduce our guest. He is returning back to the property couch. He is the property professor, also known as the Prince of Adelaide. Welcome back to the property couch, Peter.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Bryce. Always great to be on here.
Oh, mate, it's always great to hear from you as well. You've got wonderful insights, not only from being a property investor yourself for many, many years, but also as your role as chair of the Property Investment Professionals of Australia. Pete, one of the things we're interested to chat to you about today is the fact that you have been investing through numerous cycles, and recently you put out some information around what that looks like post some of the economic downturns. But we're particularly interested to talk to you about a few things today. First of all, how you've navigated COVID and what your observations are from the period we've just been through and what you see in the foreseeable future. Secondly, we also want to get a few insights like Ben and I shared last week around what you might tell your 20-something-year-old self when you just before you bought your first investment property. And then the third thing is we've got some exciting insights to share between you and Ben later on in Ben's segment regarding the survey results from the joint PICA survey that you did around COVID. So there's lots to chat about. But first of all, can we kick it off with just your general commentary around the period, the last 6 weeks that we've just experienced through the pandemic, and how you've navigated that and what your key observations have been.
Well, personally, there hasn't been a huge change other than the uni classes are now on Zoom. And we haven't had as greater restrictions in Adelaide, South Australia, as you've had in Victoria. So, like, we haven't been banned from attending the university or offices. So, generally, I'll work from home. But if I need to use the photocopier or a scanner, I'll go into uni. We were still able to go out. I was still riding my bike during the lockdown. So, not a huge change, unlike some other people. Like my second eldest daughter lives in Melbourne, and I know that the restrictions were quite tight there. So personally, it hasn't been a big issue. Like, I've still got my job. I mean, the contract runs out at the end of the year, so you probably know that COVID-19's had a big impact not only on immigration but international students. So it might be early retirement for me, boys, next year. Who knows?
I hope not. I hope they'll, see a common sense and get those students back, Pete.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, we've actually talked about chartering flights, all 3 universities in South Australia, chartering flights to get the international students over ready for second semester, because international education is the #1 export in South Australia. It's number 3 or 4 in Australia, but the #1 in South Australia. So it is critical to us.
What would that look like, Pete? What would that look like? You charter them over, and then they'd have to make sure that they were placed in a quarantine scenario and then released.
Like we did, there were some chartered flights from India and other countries, and they came to Adelaide, and they self-isolated in hotels, and for 2 weeks, and then they went to their home. So it would be the same thing, because as you can imagine, there's not much travel at the moment, so the hotels are pretty empty. So it would be a very good opportunity to do that. So yes, fly in, 2 weeks isolation, and then off to uni. Because you also got to remember, we've only had 2 new cases in the last 5 weeks. And both of those can be traced back to people who were overseas. So things are okay here. So far as property is concerned, probably not much different to the rest of Australia. Like, hardly anyone was going to open inspections, and then they were stopped, and that was private inspections, and then hardly anyone was making any appointments to go. If they were, real estate agents weren't at open inspections for 30 minutes. It might have been an hour and 30 minutes, because you could only have a certain amount of people in the house at one time. Auctions obviously went online. But what I am hearing is that property prices haven't dropped much, but transactions have taken a huge, huge hit. So for me, there are a number of indicators to the health of the property market, but 2 of them are property prices and the number of transactions. So even though property prices haven't moved much at all, the fact that there's hardly any property being sold or bought and sold is an indicator that the market overall is not as healthy as it could be, which is understandable with COVID-19, but thankfully values are holding. But now that restrictions are being relaxed, people can go to open inspections. There's still a limit. People can go to auctions with a cap on the number of people that can attend. I can see that the number of transactions will continue to improve. And I don't think, I know that there were headlines 2 weeks ago from the CommBank, and I'm pretty sure you boys spoke about it, where property prices were going to drop by 32%. But as you said, that was the very worst case scenario. I think CommBank said probably they'll drop 11 to 12%. And 2 of the other major banks said the same, and I think Westpac said 15%. So it's not like there's going to be a property crash. And you mentioned it before. I did some research for PIPA on what's happened to property prices over the last 3 recessions and the GFC. And, there weren't any big hits. Actually, the biggest hit was in 2018, when the availability of credit was really tightened up. That's what really affected the market, not so much recessions and global financial crises.
Pete, can you embellish on that a little bit? Because we talked about that off air, but we were talking about the fact that you've invested through many cycles. You have actually looked back in the rear vision mirror and you looked at the effect of GFC, the previous recessions, and what impact or what result was after property. Can you give us a bit more detail around what your observations were?
Yeah, sure. Look, went back to so there was a recession in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and then the GFC. Some of the more striking analysis was in the 1970s, after the recession, Sydney property prices doubled in 5 years after that recession in the 70s. And not in any year, either the 2 years of the recession or for the 5 years afterwards, not in 1 year did property prices drop in that 70s recession. In the 1990s recession, the worst was Sydney dropped by 5% in 1 year. Sydney dropped by 6% in 1 year. Melbourne dropped by 5% in 1 year. But 5 years after the end of those recessions, property prices were well above where they were at the end of the recession. Global financial crisis, all capital cities in 2011 had a drop in price, which had never been seen in the 3 previous recessions. And I think that was because there was a lot of stimulus money thrown in around 2009. And by 2011, all that stimulus money had run out. So it was really a delayed effect of the GFC. But even after the 3 recessions and the GFC, property prices have been very resilient. And it seems to me, unlike the past, where people's confidence was determined by whether interest rates were going down or up or down, now property prices are more a reflection of the availability of credit. Like, it doesn't matter how confident you are and willingness to get into the market. If there are far too many hurdles to jump to borrow the money, you won't be able to borrow the money. Therefore, there's a decrease in demand, and that's going to affect price.
Do you think there's any difference between what we're experiencing now? Well, actually, a better question: is there anything uniquely different about the situation that we find ourselves in that doesn't exist in the GFC, that didn't exist in those recessions, that you're mindful of in terms of the outlook? For example, we could be in the eye of the storm for some commentators, where there might be a second wave of economic challenge, given that there will be a lag effect of that. So is there any differences, and do you see that there is a second wave of challenge coming?
Yeah. Firstly, I don't see a second wave coming unless there is a second wave of coronavirus. Mm-hmm. But providing we all do the right thing and socially distance and wash our hands and do all of those sorts of things, we should be okay. But the one distinguishing factor between this event and the recessions and the GFC is our economy was okay before we went into this. So this financial crisis has been caused by a health crisis, whereas the recessions and the GFC were caused by poor investments generally, globally or nationally, or poor financial situations. So I think our recovery is going to be pretty quick because things were pretty good before we went into it. So really the underlying factors, except for employment or unemployment and underemployment, they are going to be the 2 key factors that determine how quickly we get out. Now, after each recession and the GFC, yes, unemployment went up very quickly and slowly came down again. And I can see the same thing happening, except that it will go up much faster than it has in the recessions. Because what we did was we virtually shut off business. Like, I think it was the Monday the 16th of March, businesses were closed. So it's not like there was a gradual move to unemployment and underemployment. That was virtually the date. So it's going to be a very quick drop in unemployment, and then we'll slowly come out of it. Fantastic that the federal government and the labour movement, at this stage anyway, are looking at working together rather than against each other to get us back on our feet. Now, if they can work together and bring in some wholesale changes that will help with our economy improving much quicker and also structurally changing employment and underemployment, I think that'll be a good thing. So if that goodwill can carry on for a few months until we get out of this, I think that'll be an excellent result for Australia.
And Pete, you talk about unemployment. When you dig a little deeper into that unemployment and you look at the age groups that have been most affected and the industries that have been most affected, what's your view or the correlation between that and the people who are buying property or selling property?
Yeah, from what I've seen, unfortunately, unemployment at this stage is focused really on the younger group, 15 to 25, maybe 15 to 35, whereas property buyers tend to be, at the earliest probably late 20s, these days probably early 30s. So there are two different groups. So, in a sentence, to say it in a sentence, generally speaking, the people who are buying property are not the ones that have been affected by unemployment. Obviously, that the economy will suffer in a number of ways, but so far as property is concerned, because it's the younger ones that have been affected mainly by unemployment, they're not the ones that really buy. Yes, they do rent, and that's why I think rents will suffer more than property prices, and rents will come down. Not as much as property prices. But if you're looking to buy, there will be less properties bought and sold, but property prices should remain relatively stable.
And the doomsdayers are saying it's a false dawn, obviously, because we haven't seen the results of the repayment pauses on mortgages come the end of September. What's your view in regards to, what you think, what initiatives the government and the banks will do to avoid any rush of distressed stock?
Okay, well, I get, like Bryce asked before, what's different this time around? So I talked about the two main things, but other things are interest rates have never been as low this time around as they were during the three recessions and the GFC. Never, or certainly not in my lifetime, have the banks offered en masse mortgage holidays. So even if you unfortunately lost your job, if the bank's given you a 6-month holiday, that gives you 6 months to find another job. Even though, on the surface it looks pretty bad, the fact that you don't have to pay your mortgage for 6 months, it doesn't mean that, you get a free ticket. You still have to finish paying it off at the end. And if you do have a job, but you may have lost hours, interest rates are really low. There are no big reasons why people have to panic and sell. There is no need to panic. Property prices will drop significantly if panic sets in. Unlike, because you're right, Bryce, I'm probably a little bit older than you two blokes, so I've been through a number of cycles. In the 90s, when we had the recession that we had to have, interest rates were double digit. Commercial property interest rates were over 20%. Obviously, if you've lost your tenant to try and come up with a 20% interest repayment on top of the mortgage is huge. But here, the banks, not the banks, the governments have asked landlords and tenants to get together and work together. If your business has shut, how can we negotiate the rent? Maybe pay half rent for now and then you make it up later, or whatever the case may be. One of the promising things around this time around is that everyone seems to have come together to help each other. The Liberal Party and the Labor Party haven't got together yet. That might need a greater crisis. But
they did for about 3 weeks, Pete.
They did, that's right. Labor Party were quiet for a while. But it's very heartening to see that happen. So there is no doubt that property prices will take a hit, but there is no way in the world it's going to drop by 20%, 30%, because it never has in the last 80 years. So why would it now? When we have these other things like bank holidays, low interest rates, government and unions working together. Why would we have that?
Peter, what do you think the international experts miss in that? Harry Dent, Jonathan Tapper, just to name a few. What? They they circle the prey, and they look for opportunities to come and prove that they're right. I think Harry Dent's in town to talk that up as well. But just for the benefit of our audience, who continually are being bombarded by, we did cover the CBA at 32%. We provided some balance at the time, but how does our audience digest these international experts who keep relentlessly coming in, circling around, trying to talk the property down? What would you say is the fundamental thing that they keep missing that means that their predictions prove time and time again to not be true?
I don't think people overseas understand Australians, in inverted commas, obsession with owning property. The last thing an Australian is going to do is sell their home. They'll go and get a second job. They'll cut back on their holidays. They'll sell the boat, whatever it is. The last thing they're going to do is sell their home. Unlike in the US during the GFC, where their regulations are a lot looser than ours are, and they just left the keys on the kitchen bench and walked out of the house. There were no repercussions. That's not going to happen here. One of the great advantages that I have working where I am in the Master of Property at Adelaide Uni is most of my students are international students. So I get a very good international perspective. Like even the profile of an Australian investor is quite different. It's quite unique in a country to have your average mum and dad, your average worker, invest in property. In many parts of Europe, it's the old money that invests in property. It's very hard for a typical worker to get enough money, because property prices in Europe are quite expensive, to buy, and it would be an apartment, not a house, in one of the major cities in Europe. So there are a number of differences between the Australian property market and those overseas. And so one of the reasons why these, I don't know what I would call them, they might be experts in something, but they're certainly not experts in Australian property. One reason why they keep getting it wrong is because they don't understand the structure of Australian property and the psyche of the Australian homeowner and investor. So in Australia, we aspire to invest and make more money. But in some other countries, well, one in particular, but I'm not going to mention it because I don't want to offend anyone that might be from that country, they look down on people that try and better themselves and buy up property so that others can rent. And I've got that from a property expert who was from that particular country. Look, don't take any notice of those people. You need to take notice of trustworthy and creditworthy people who understand the Australian property market. That's who you need to listen to.
Peter, that's a really important message, right? Because we've been, obviously, you're asking a barber about a haircut in one sense because you're thinking self-interest, but also on the other side, you'd like to think that the subject matter experts who are in the field doing what they do every day will probably have a better read on the marketplace than anyone else. And so my fear for those doomsdayers, they are trying to encourage people to sell property, get out while you can. And that's very, very dangerous advice for those people. And so, I've said this about the media, be very careful about what you say and the influence that you can have on people's judgment, because the reality is if they are wrong, as they have been wrong for the last 5 recessions where they've been calling, and even when the property prices were growing, they were calling for a 40% correction on the market. If people have acted on that, on their so-called expertise and their advice, they are financially at risk of never getting back into the property market or never being in a situation where they can acquire the great Australian dream. And so, this is the same sort of thing that's going on right now. There's obviously there'll be rumours and there'll be an announcement very shortly about, I suspect, the government of the day are going to go back to their popular draw and pull out a first homeowner's bonus for buying new property. Well, I was reading the Fin Review yesterday, and all of the builders and developers are going, for God's sake, government, and fair enough too, it's a big cross against the government for signalling that they're going to have this big stimulus program, because guess what everyone's done? All of the people who are going to sign contracts up this week and next week and all, they're all sitting on their hands waiting for a so-called $20, $30, $40, $50,000 bonus. And so that's the problem with these types of signalling arrangements. And so you can see they are now controlling demand, because unless they announce something, these people are going to basically do nothing. So it's very, it's obviously one of the options that the government has of the day to be able to do that. The other option, we've talked about before, is immigration, and that's probably the easiest and most cost-effective one, because there's no doubt that this artificially inflates portions of the market and some property prices in the market. You may even see some of the builders put a $20,000, margin on top of what they were going to build for in the first place, because everyone's rushing in. There are better ways in which you can do it, but do you reckon they seek the advice of the industry? And this is another letdown from me in terms of, why not seek advice in terms of what's available to you? And I know the Property Council of Australia did mention a $50,000 stimulus, so they are probably in that camp as well. But the other big thing they did mention is, as you were saying before about bringing international students here, charter flights, charter them in, put them in ISO, 14 days, double check that they're okay, and then let them out in the community, because we all know every economist agrees that for every person who comes here, they create jobs. They are a net maker of jobs, not a net taker of jobs. So all this, sort of political influence saying that there's jobs to be taken, and all, that's just rubbish. It is absolutely rubbish. And there are reports that prove that. There is a significant report released last year, and I'll put the details in the show notes for anyone who's curious about this, in regards to it actually makes jobs. It doesn't reduce the prospects of jobs for Australians, and it also doesn't reduce the wages that are paid to Australians, which is the argument of those people who are putting that forward. Well, the evidence is in. It's simply not the case. So I think that is an important message for everyone who's listening, because what is going to happen is, if everyone's thinking that property prices are going to hit a wall in September and October, and everyone's waiting, that pent-up demand is going to cause nothing but property prices to grow. If once they work out, holy crap, the bottom was probably March, April, June, the now time, not what it's going to be, when all this demand kicks in. So I think it's important for our listeners to go to the facts, get the data out there, listen to experts like yourself, Peter, in terms of, what your expectations are and your subject matter expertise in the area, because at the end of the day, we've got the same data as what they've got, and we're assessing it based on people's ability to buy, hold, and sustain the asset, and then where the interest lives, because it is different to the property market, as we've talked about, the share market, I should say. So it's an important message. So I really appreciate your summary of what you've seen happen in the last 6 weeks, and also where we're at in regards to the next 3 to 6 months. So thanks for that.
Hey, Peter, can you give us are you privy to give us a bit of an insight? Clearly, the universities in Adelaide have been chatting about what they want to do. What would it take for that to happen? And is everyone agreeing that that's a good idea, or are you coming up against some roadblocks, or is it just an idea at this point?
Oh, well, this came from the Premier. So Steve Marshall's been on the record to say that he wants to get the international students here and self-isolate for 2 weeks and then go to uni, because, other than it's good for the economy, these students have paid a lot of money, and I need to be careful what I'm saying here, because it's being recorded, isn't it? But let's put it, the main driver of online education is not because it's greater quality than face-to-face, because it makes money, right? In this case, just like we're doing right now, the reason that we are talking via Zoom is because of the travel restrictions, right? Like if I come to Victoria to do it, when I come back to South Australia, I have to self-isolate for 2 weeks. So we're doing Zoom at the moment because we have to. There is no other alternative. And that's why we're doing Zoom. That's why we're having online classes, because we have to. But in the second semester, we need to get back to face-to-face classes, just like school kids are back in the classroom. And and I'm sure as time goes on, there will be more and more people in the office. But we have to be careful with social distancing and hygiene and all of that stuff. On another matter, I think commercial property and offices are going to change structurally. There's going to be some big pain there. But slowly we're going to get back to normal. But getting back to the students, the sooner we get them back, the happier they'll be. Like, not one of my students is happy with the fact that they have to do Zoom. But, you know, there's no alternative. Like, we were planning on an international property study tour to Abu Dhabi and Dubai this year, but we can't go because of the travel ban. All my students are very disappointed, but I can't do anything about it. So now that the worst of it is over, so far as coronavirus is concerned, and providing everyone does the right thing and we don't have too many people in the one room and everybody washes their hands and stuff like that, life slowly needs to get back to normal.
Give us your take on commercial, Peter. I know you're into residential, but you flagged it then. So we had Scott O'Neill recently on the podcast talking about his views on commercial, but clearly businesses, people, we're all interacting in a way that's been the great work from home experiment, which will change people's views going. What's your take on the commercial sector?
All right, so if we were going to rank things in order, residential prices, property prices will be the least hit. Residential property rents will be the next. Next is commercial property. One, in the immediate term, a number of these businesses that have been shut will not return, which means the landlord does not have a tenant. And in the longer term, if we start with retail, the internet had a huge negative impact on bricks and mortar retail. That is just going to continue. There will be a number of shops that don't open, but they will probably still have an online presence. So that means we don't need retail property, but I think there will be an increase in demand for warehousing. And then there's offices. So providing bosses, and you two fellas at Empower Wealth, you could probably give us a greater insight here, providing the bosses feel that productivity hasn't changed much or hasn't dropped much with people working from home, I think there will be more people working from home in the future, which means there will be less requirement on office space. So less demand for office space means prices are going to come down and rents are going to come down. So in the long term, you know, I think commercial property will take a greater hit than residential property. But if I could just have another 30 seconds to tell you what I think is going to be the worst hit area, and that is construction. All the builders and developers are busy now because they're building and developing what they signed up for last year. Second half of the year, there's going to be, well, I don't want to say blood in the streets, but unless the government brings in some sort of incentive to buy property, in particular new property, as Ben's already said that they've already talked about it, things are not going to be good in the construction industry. Just to give you some anecdotal evidence, the builder that I use, he is building stuff that he signed up, that he had signed contracts for last year. When that's finished, he does not have any new work. One of our major volume builders in South Australia normally does 80 builds per month. In the month of April, they had 2 contracts signed.
But Peter, I talked before about second wave. Isn't that the risk of the second wave? Because if the construction industry, because I agree, right? And that's why the CEO of the Property Council of Australia has come out and suggested he's got a 7-point plan. One of those is to give a 12-month period where people are getting $50,000 bonuses to actually stimulate some brand new construction. So unless that happens, that is a real risk. So I'd be interested in your views on what is the flow-on effect of that. 80 builders in a month down to 2. Clearly, that's jobs, and then that actually has that flow-on into the economy, and that's really the great unanswered question that a lot of people have. And so, because I'm comfortable in, if you're buying in investment-grade suburbs, there's a real mix of people. So if you think about where you live in Adelaide, right? There's people in different cycles. I know that you live in the inner west there, right? So there's people at your stage of life who have got your experience and your part of the career. There's also people who are just trying to get into that market. So you've got this whole range of life cycle within your suburb. But if you go out to some suburbs where the cycle's the same demographic, same industry that they're affected, that's where it's going to have some flow-on effects for. So I'm super interested to see what you think about that second wave if that does come to fruition.
If the second wave does come through, it'll be the mortgage bill that takes the biggest hit, where everybody has only relatively recently bought their property, let's say with a 10% deposit. In the outer suburbs of our capital cities, it'll probably be their industries that are most affected by unemployment and underemployment. So it'll be those areas that I think will suffer if there is a second wave. I don't think there will be a second wave, but if there is, that's who will suffer the most, where their equity is the lowest. And generally that's right on the outer suburbs where they've just finished building their home. They virtually spent their very last dollar, because invariably, the amount that they sign for in the contract is not what they spend, because there are other hidden costs or variations. So they virtually stretch themselves to the limit, and they are the people that can least afford a second wave.
In addition to that, Peter, what you're also saying is if I'm a developer and I'm holding, 230 lots in an estate, and I've got debts to pay as well. If I'm selling that land at $280,000 a lot, there's every chance that if I need to move some of those lots at 230 or 220, I'll be doing that as well, because hence that demand's not there, but my supply is and my commitments are as well. So, and that's why the government has to move on a stimulus program. As I said, the Prime Minister on Tuesday flagged that that's exactly what they're doing. So we just need to know the details of it. But it will be a giveaway. There's no doubt about it, because we also hear from the CEO of the Housing Industry Association talking about that it's going to affect between a quarter and a third of the industry who won't have work. Some of them can obviously work on some of the new infrastructure programs that the governments will announce both at federal and state level. But that is a material number considering it's the largest employer in the country. So hence they'll have to do these types of stimulus, and that will hopefully attract the construction of house and land packages, but also we've got to then think about medium and high density off the plan apartment blocks that will also be attracted to that. But they still need to potentially go to the foreigners for buying that critical mass of those medium and high density apartments, because that's where they do get their bang for buck, the developers, and they're critical, because I suspect that the sensible investor is going to get even smarter about why would I be buying an asset of that nature when rents are 20% lower in the concentrated areas because of the oversupply and lack of tenants in those particular locations. So I'm feeling very comfortable for housing stock in the established areas, where you've got that medium and high density. Away from those areas, you've just got standard suburbia, the land's all utilised, the demand for rent is still consistent, the vacancy rates are still holding firm. But this comes back to the point that we've always been consistent on, that is the property market, especially resi, is too big to fail. There is too much at stake for the broader economy, because, as we've also said, the property market was Australia was originally built on the sheep's back, then obviously gold, then sheep, and now it is so reliant on the residential property market as a means by which it creates work, and then the on-flowing work into retail, which we've been consistent on. So the government are not going to let it fail. They are completely aware that, even with the data that came out yesterday in regards to construction approvals, we've definitely seen building approvals for new builds falling off a cliff, apartments falling off a cliff. What has been interesting, there is a pickup in renovating and home improvements. So that has picked up a little bit of that, but you need that. You couldn't pick up the shortfall in terms of building new houses. So we need to be building around 150,000 new dwellings a year to keep at steady pace. And that's not even meeting the demand if we had immigration coming in. So at the peak of the market in our construction boom, post the GFC, we were doing as many as 200 to 220,000 dwellings. So if we can maintain that at 150, 160, we're going to be short on the demand levels for the future. But if we've got immigration only running at 38,000, like the Prime Minister said on Tuesday, then it's probably going to balance itself out. But if we have what I think should happen is we should turn the immigration tap back on, bring those families in here and those skilled workers in here, makes perfect sense. Then we've got nothing to see here, and the government would have done the job, and then watch the economy be thriving in the next 12 to 18 months in regards to that side of business and that side of employment. If we want to make jobs, the job making happens at the construction level, and then both directly and indirectly. So I think that's an important message that you shared as well.
I agree, 100%.
Hey Peter, let's pivot to yourself. You're a successful property investor. We've had you on our podcast a number of times, and so we've showcased that you've got your skills in property development, but you've also been a long-term buy and hold of property. So it'd be really interesting to see if you could get to turn back the clock. Ben and I did this exercise in last week's podcast, so we're keen to find that with you. If you were to go back to your 20-something, or in your case, you mentioned that you bought your first investment property at 30, but you bought your first property at 23. So if you're going to go back to your 20s and tell yourself a few lessons along the way, what would they be from what you know now, what you wish you knew then?
First one would be listen to my dad. Dad was a real estate agent. He kept saying, buy property, buy property. For a young man in his early 20s who was only interested in football and socialising and stuff like that, why would I want to, go and commit to a mortgage and have that around my neck? But the main reason we bought a home at 23 is because my first teaching job was out in the country. And back then, a little bit like it is now, it cost just as much to buy a home as it did to rent a home. That is the mortgage repayment versus the rent. And thankfully, at that stage, I was engaged. So we had two incomes, we had decent savings, so we could afford to buy a house. So it was almost by default, we bought a house. And then, as you said, at the age of 30 is when we bought our first investment property, which happened to be a group of units in the country town that I taught in for a number of years. The next
Peter,
one
can I press in on that? So you've got we've got a huge demographic on our podcast from late teenagers right through till CEOs, 67. So it's a big demographic. If experience is that thing you get 2 minutes after you need it, to the 20-something-year-old right now who's listening to you going, yeah, Pete, like how do we actually get that to land for them? Because they're not going to, it's not till they're 35 or they're 37, they'll go, I listened to Peter once and he said that I should have bought more property and I didn't. What do you reckon the difference is between it being a platitude and people actually doing it?
I don't know, because I think I must be doing something right, because I have 4 children, right? One has no interest in property. One, she's in her late 20s, so we've gone 50-50 in an investment property. Mm-hmm. And just in the last week, I spoke to my kids because our trust laws are changing here in South Australia. So I need to nominate one of my children as a person for land tax. So I asked my 2 youngest kids, so when do you think you're going to buy an investment property? And I was very pleasantly surprised. One said in 2 years' time, she's just started a full-time job and she's in Canberra, but she's going to buy here in Adelaide in her hometown. And guess who's going to help her buy the house in Adelaide?
I think they've got good support there. I'd take you any day of the week to help me buy a place in South Australia there, Pete.
Yeah. And my youngest one said, Dad, I reckon if I've been working full-time for a year, I'm going to buy an investment property. So I don't know, Bryce, I don't know what the difference is between me not listening to my father and most of my kids. I don't know if they were actively listening or it was just a process of osmosis, that this stuff just, soaked into their soul and they worked out, yeah, I can see how mum and dad have done well through property and we live in a lovely house. Yeah, maybe I should do something as well.
I think that's the key, to be honest, Pete. It's the modelling, isn't it? Because if we talked about it last week, if you grew up in scarcity, you're probably going to take on scarcity money beliefs. And if you grew up in abundance, you'll take on abundance money beliefs, with outliers along the way. So I think really it comes down to, I'm going to do it with my kids. You've done it with your kids, where I'm going to make buying property so incredibly normal and so incredibly like just part of the process that hopefully that will be a case where they, they might rebel and say, I don't want to listen to Dad, but I guess I want to make it part of the DNA in the discussion around money, which we've started to well and truly educate our young kids around how money works. And I think ultimately it just comes down to your parents your strong influences. Doesn't have to be your parents, but your very strong influences, just reinforcing the fact that it's important, it makes a difference. And if experience is that thing you get 2 minutes after you need it, therefore you need to lean on someone who's got the experience and just take a bit of their wise counsel. But it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we all look back and we all go, geez, we should have bought more sooner. But at the time, we had a whole bunch of reasons why we didn't. So, that's a good one.
That's actually my fifth one that I was going to talk about. Should have bought sooner rather than later. But we're all geniuses in hindsight, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We'll get to that. So let's kick off with your second one. What's the second thing you would have said?
All right. As you know, many people are attracted to brand new property. It's all brand spanking new and shiny and looks sexy, as I was. But thankfully, I never bought anything new, and interestingly, neither did my father, because my father was in part of his real estate career, he was into buying old places, fixing them up and selling them. And often the market was so good back in the 70s and 80s, you would buy it, fix it up and sell it before you had to settle. So you never actually settled on it. It's a bit like people try and do with off the plan now. But with off the plan, you might have a 1 or 2 year time frame. This was like a 6 or 8 week time frame. So certainly buying old places, which implicitly means that the value is in the land, is what I would be telling my 20-year-old self to do. Don't be tempted by what you see in the weekend newspapers with those builders' ads about buying house and land packages. Don't go buy brand new apartments or off the plan stuff. Stick to the old houses, because that's what, the older the property, the better.
What if I'm getting 50 grand though, Pete? What if the government's going to give me 50 grand?
What I was going to say to you before, Ben, and this is what worries me, because I've already heard real estate agents say to me, or in the past when there was incentives out, especially from the South Australian government, when people were looking at buying, let's say, a $400,000 property, if you buy it brand new, you get so many things. You get discount on stamp duty. You get a $15,000 grant. You'll often get cash back from the developer. You buy the other place, you get nothing. So what concerns me is these property spruikers are going to come out of the woodwork and encourage people to buy brand new. I've told my kids again and again, and I've even shown them on a very simple Excel spreadsheet, even though you can buy this new property and you'll get, I don't know, let's call it $20,000 in incentives. If the old property grows much faster than the new property, in 5 years, have a look at where you are, all right? So you bought them both for 400, the old property is worth 500, the brand new property is still only worth 400 because you paid a premium when it was new. Mm-hmm. So there's $100 difference after 5 years. So what that they gave you 20,000? That doesn't help you. So you're right, Ben. The temptation is there because the young people, and I don't want to get into an argument with young people that are listening here, young people don't seem to save as much money these days as they used to.
Oh, Peter, that's outrageous. Oh, now we're going to get complaints and everyone's going to ride in.
It's going to be full now, Pete.
So the deposit is a problem. If the federal government is going to come out with a $40,000 or $50,000 first homeowner grant, mate, a significant proportion of your deposit is right there. It doesn't matter that you've spent most of your money in the past years traveling and eating smashed avocado and what else you do. There it is. So it's much easier to get into the market that way. But in the medium to long term, it is not going to help you.
Mhm.
Well, you gave some insights before on that, Pete. So if people go wider, like if they want to put a roof over their head to live in, clearly there's an opportunity. But you talked about the very thin equity margins in those particular locations. So therefore, as an investment, it still plays into what we've been talking about for 5 years. That it's not a place that has scarcity and all those sorts of things that are important to make an investment grade. So it's important to distinct between if it's an essential need to put a roof over your head so that you can get into the market. In some cases, it is the only way that people can get in, which is fine. But as an investment, you're saying it's not what you want to do. So buying established properties, you want to be the second and subsequent purchaser of property, don't you?
Yeah. Look, one of the lovely things at the moment is because my kids are between the ages of 22 and 30. Now their friends are at the age where they're buying houses. So I'm getting questions from their friends about buying property. And a number of them are attracted by looking in the weekend newspapers or the glossy magazines. And I'm saying to them, two things. Generally, your first home is not going to be your forever home. But if you do want to move to a second, bigger and or better home, you need to make sure you buy the right first home. So buying that house and land package in the outer suburbs is not going to help you move any closer into the city in the future.
Can I repeat that? Because I want to circle back on that. Generally speaking, your first home is not your dream home. Mm-hmm. Realistic expectations, people. The one thing that I think that should cut through to any millennial who wants to get into the property market, which we applaud you for, and I'll ask you this question, Pete. When did you buy that beautiful home that you currently live in that I've enjoyed a meal at? Some famous octopus that you cooked.
Some grilled octopus, yeah.
Some grilled octopus. When did you get to your dream home? How old were you?
Yeah. Well, I'm 59 and we celebrated our 10-year anniversary this month. So I was 49.
49.
Our first home was a 2-bedroom transportable in a country town.
There you go. So I think the point being is that, and Peter then summed it up beautifully. I mean, go back and listen to this again. Realistic expectations in terms of your first home isn't going to be a dream home, but what you buy, where you buy, how you potentially add value is going to be critical on your steps to your next property and getting on that property ladder and building up from that. So research, focus on land content, do all the things that Peter's just telling you to do, because that information there, everyone, is absolute gold if you want to be serious about delayed gratification and expectations. Because remember, James Clearall said to us, this is that the greatest joy we have is in delayed results, not so much in thinking that we've got to get there straight away, in terms of that. So I think that was a great one, Pete. So I really wanted to hone in on that one because I think it's a great message.
So Peter, number 1 was listen to Dad. Number 2 was make sure you buy old places / not new places. What's number 3?
Following on from what Ben was saying, it's buy land. In other words, buy houses rather than units, because the value is in the land. You're far better off buying a detached house, old detached house and some land, rather than for the same money buying certainly not an apartment or a unit, but the more land you have, the better off you're going to be. And I can see it personally. Like I own a number of properties. Some of them are places that I built recently and I've kept, but I haven't kept them because of the capital growth. I've kept them because of the great depreciation I can get. And generally after 5 years, I sell them because the best part of the depreciation is the first 5 years, and then I move on. But we have a balance. We have a group of old units. We have old character homes as well as in our portfolio. But I know that most of the capital growth is going to come from those older buildings that are on decent sized blocks of land, but importantly, close to the city or very, very close to the beach.
What about in the bigger cities, Pete, in terms of getting into closer in, say, for a townhouse? And I'm not talking about big townhouse developments. I'm talking about smaller townhouse developments, particularly with their own title, if you can. Do you have a variation of that view, or actually probably not a variation, because wherever possible, you still want to apply that principle. But do you ever see a place for townhouses in your philosophy in the bigger cities?
In the bigger cities, yes. Because I go to Melbourne quite regularly now, because daughter number 2 lives there. And so I can see that it is very difficult to get into the Melbourne market compared to the Adelaide market. And close in Adelaide is different to close in Melbourne. Close in Adelaide is up to 5Ks. Close in Melbourne is what, fellas? 10Ks? A bit further out? I'm not sure. What do you reckon? Close
Depending on which side, but in some cases 15, 20, right? So
yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, so, it's definitely not the 15-minute city, Peter. That is Adelaide.
Something on its own block in a bigger city, even if it is a townhouse, but to be able to afford to get into it, might have to be quite old. So you might have to paint it, or you might replace the kitchen one day. But the one thing that you can't change about a property is its location. So get yourself in the right location, and then almost every other facet of property you can change. You can make the property bigger. You can knock down the property. You can make the property better by renovating it. But you cannot change not only its macro location, its suburb, but its micro location in the right street. The key to making money in property is buying and holding the right property in the right street, in the right suburb, in the right capital city.
Amen. We agree to that. Hey, here's one for you, Pete. Would you buy a 2-bedroom flat as opposed to a 2-bedroom apartment in Sydney in the built-up inner east?
So give me a suburb in Sydney.
Randwick, Bondi is the obvious one.
Maroubra,
Bronte, Manly on the northern beaches.
Well, one of my kids has just come back from Sydney, so the boomerang generation, right? I'm experiencing that now. So she was in Sydney paying $800 a week for a 1-bedroom apartment in Bondi, no view, no car park.
Yeah.
Generally, she lived in different places in Bondi, and if when you refer to a flat, you mean the older style properties, then yes, that's what I would go for.
Yeah.
Generally, 2 bedrooms is better than 1 bedroom, but obviously 2 bedrooms is going to be more expensive than 1 bedroom.
Yeah, cool.
Car parking in Adelaide is critical. Car parking in Sydney is not that critical. People are happy to park their cars on the street. But again, Bondi is a great suburb. You'd want to get into the right type of streets in Bondi. And if you're going to buy a flat, like in an older style building, the less flats in the block, the better. You don't want to be buying in a block of 50 or 100.
Yeah, you buy the old decos that are 1 of 6 or something, got beautiful character.
Yes,
and
perfect.
all that sort of stuff.
Perfect.
So we're in alignment, but clearly you're talking from an Adelaide perspective. So number 1 was listen to Dad. 2 was buying old places. 3 is buy land for houses not used. 4 is?
Save your money.
Uh-huh.
When I was 20 years old and I had just finished studying to become a teacher, I went on a holiday. But my mum and dad never let me use my savings to go on a holiday. They said to me, you need to go to the bank and borrow some money to go on a holiday, so that I understood the value of saving and paying off a debt, because I hadn't had one up until then. So I borrowed money to go on a holiday, but geez, I paid it off really quickly.
Wow, that's
an interesting teaching. Yeah, isn't it? Yeah.
So I learned from a very early age, when I get my wage, I put some money aside straight away, and then the rest of it is for expenses. But even till now, we do that right now. You know, I get my wage, and the next day a portion of it goes to a different bank account. You know, and I'll be 60 next year, so I'm still doing it. In the early days, I was spending a bit too much money, but certainly now I have learnt my lesson. Yeah.
Very good. And we hinted at number 5, but let's talk it through again. What's your number 5?
Yeah, buy sooner rather than later. So I didn't buy my first investment property till I was 30. If I had bought it, and I had the opportunity because I lived at home until I had to go out to the country, I could have bought an investment property well before my 30s, which meant, you know, I'd have even more properties now. But as I said to you before, mate, we're all geniuses in hindsight. If I did listen to my father earlier, I would have bought sooner rather than later. But I'm not complaining, mate. I'm not complaining. Life's been pretty good to me, knock on wood.
Yeah. And I guess, buying sooner rather than later is, do you think there's ever a time when it's too late to buy?
That's a very interesting question, Bryce, because the last 2 or 3 weeks I've come to the realisation that I have finished buying and holding property. What is a 59-year-old doing taking out a 30-year mortgage? Firstly, I've got to convince the bank, right, that, yep, no worries, and I can pay it off, and I'm sure I could. But, and I think also COVID-19 has really got me thinking, because, I mean, the international student market is fantastic, has been up until now, and I'm sure even though my contractor's uni is only on a yearly basis, I'm sure it would be renewed, but there will be a hit in international students, and maybe I won't go back next year. I won't be asked back next year. So why am I still buying investment property? Like, if I lose my salary at uni, that's a significant portion of my capacity to pay off a mortgage. Why do I want to put myself under stress? When is enough enough? For me, it's now. Doesn't mean that I won't buy anymore, because I still love buying and adding value, like doing subdivisions or stuff like that. Just chopping up land. I'm not really interested in building anymore. Just want to buy land, chop it up and sell it. Just the short-term stuff. But I reckon I have finished buying and holding.
What an interesting insight. You're clearly you're 15 years ahead of me, Peter. So it's interesting because when you're younger, it's all about accumulating and setting up for growth. But it's when you get to a point where you're obviously at a reflection point in your life now, where you're going, well, what's the point and what am I doing it all for? Because at the end of the day, there comes a point where it's no longer about the growth. It's about the income, it's about the cash flow, and it's about the lifestyle that you've worked so hard, because you've been financially free for a long time, but clearly you're having known you for a long time. The fact that you need to keep your mind ticking over, you get itchy, you have to be, I've seen the developments that you do, or you've taken me on a tour. I know that you get a buzz out of doing that, but it's interesting that for me to project what I might be thinking at a similar point in time in life, to go, well, the point of this is to create some lifestyle, and clearly that's what you're thinking about.
But the other thing is, if I stop buying for myself, that means I can help my kids. So what I did with daughter number 2 is we went 50-50. So I'm still putting money into property, but not just for myself. I'm doing it because, you won't get any argument from me that property is expensive. You will get an argument from me if you say that property is unaffordable, but Australian property is no doubt expensive, generally because most of us live in houses rather than apartments, and most of us live in cities rather than country towns. So to help my kids get into the property market, what I've told them all, I'm willing to go 50-50 on the deposit. And then we each have a mortgage. So I've done that once. I've still got 3 others if they want to take it up. So I've got to leave, something aside for that.
Wow. And also showing, your character, which is 1, and 2, you're obviously cutting a path for some of our listeners who might be toying with similar ideas about how they might be able to help their kids as well. So
rather than borrowing from the bank of mum and dad, which that mum and dad knows is never going to be repaid, I think for me, as you said, I think it's good for the other people that might be listening at a similar life stage, to go 50-50 into a property, I think is great. Yes, it ties you up a little bit, but certainly daughter number 2 is very happy with it, and the other kids are keen for that to occur, because they don't have to spend twice as long saving for a deposit if dad's going to come to the party and invest half. Not give them half, but invest half.
All right, Ben, so what's making property news?
Well, Bryce, obviously the other great reason we've got Peter on is to talk about the news that we've released today. Our media release is hot off the press. and that was our COVID-19 sentiment survey for property investors. That's the Property Investment Professionals of Australia in conjunction with the Property Investors Council of Australia. So if you're not familiar with who they are, the Property Investment Professionals of Australia is the PICA association for professionals working in the property investment space. And remember, they work by a code of conduct. And so one of the critical codes of conduct for those operators is that they don't, if they don't disclose any fees that they charge. So it's really important to understand how they're paid. That's important. They also have a course there to develop out qualified property investment advisors. So people who you can go and talk to get some property investment advice. So they're the PETER Industry Association for Professionals. And the Property Investors Council of Australia is just everyday Australian, mum and dad investor Australians. Anyone who is an investor can join that association, and we're giving a voice to property investors with over 3,500 members now and growing. That is obviously where we can give a voice and advocate and also educate property investors about the right activities to do. Because remember, property investment industry is unregulated and there are a lot of cowboys in our industry. So it's important that people know who they can trust. Now, the reason we put the COVID-19 survey together is we wanted to get an insight into terms of how people were feeling about the property market. So the survey opened on Wednesday, the 13th of May and closed on Sunday, the 24th of May. We had 1,877 responses. And I'm really pleased, obviously, with Peter being the chair of PIPA and myself as the chair of PICA, is we just want to share some of those insights from that, Pete. So why don't you lead us off in terms of our first question and the response we got?
So first question was, do you believe now is a good time to invest in residential property? And we had just over 70% of investors agree that it was. So overall, I was very pleasantly surprised with investors' outlook about buying and selling property. And certainly this first question here, in a nutshell, is a reflection of what investors were thinking. That despite all the doomsdayers and the negative press, they still feel it's a good time to buy.
And I think it's a really good point to note that this is also coming out in the Westpac Melbourne Institute survey as well, that there's more optimism than pessimism when it comes to the property market. And I think that is also a really good indication. Now, what you can read into this, because second question here, and because I think it's important to understand, so we're going to share the full results to the community and get it out to also the members of each of the associations. The second question is, are you looking to purchase an investment property within the next 6 months? Now, 38% said yes and 62% said no. Now, a lot of people might read that as basically saying that, oh, well, so they might like the market, it's a good time to buy, but they may not be in a position to buy. And what I want to give that context, because when we were looking at this study, we were basically saying, I reckon if you asked anyone if it's a good time to buy a new car, if it's a good time to buy a fridge, if it's a good time to buy a mattress, a lounge suite, because a lot of things are on sale, right? Because industry has been disrupted. So I think that first question is really basically saying, if I really had the money, I'm in, right? And so we can see there that roughly 40% are saying that I'm almost in. And if we add then on to question number 3, which was about sort of being in that next stage, and number 4, so these combination of questions are around, 6 to 12 months, very likely that the COVID is going to see them buy property. So we start to see a lot of results coming through that's basically changing people's mindset around buying in the next 6 to 12 months. But also what we see there is a lot of people who are no change. So when you ask a question like, has COVID-19 made it more or less likely that you'll buy property within the next 6 months? 18% said yes, more likely. 24% said less likely, but 57 or 58% basically said no change. So that doesn't mean that they're not going to do anything. It basically means that I was already going to buy a property. It's not going to, just because of COVID-19 doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to stop with that activity. So it bodes well for an overall perception of the market, which is what we were trying to convey with this, that there's far more optimism in the property investment community than pessimism. Is that how you read it, Pete?
Yeah, certainly. That there were just under 60% that said that their mind wasn't changed for the next 6 months. Just under 60% that said their mind hadn't changed for the next 6 to 12 months. But interesting in selling as well, Ben, 60% said that hadn't changed their mind. And the next biggest was that they are less likely to sell. So 35% said they are less likely to sell. And I'm one of them. I was looking to sell an investment property around July, August, but I'm not going to do that because I don't think the market's going to be that good. But the other very heartening news is only 5% are more likely to sell in the next 6 months. So if we assume that 5% are more likely to sell because they're panicking, that's only 5%. 95% are not panicking, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it's a really positive story there, and it sort of goes on to lead into, the survey then starts to talk about income. So there has been 36% of people have been affected outside of rental income. So we wanted to get a gauge in regards to how they had been affected in their work, less hours, reduction in their wages. I mean, I was one of those people who said yes, and my wages, we took a pay cut here in our business at the management level. So I answered yes to that question. So, but interestingly, I haven't been affected from the rental side. So no one of my rental accommodation has basically asked for a reduction in rents. And so that's a nice little segue into, the hardship question. Only 8% of people, 7.83% of people said that, experiencing financial hardship, meaning you're unable to pay for your financial commitments. So that also tells us 92% of people are business as usual. We're going to be able to meet our commitments. So it's not as difficult as some areas would suspect. Then Pete, question 9, do you want to just sort of share an insight into question 9?
Yeah, so just over 90% of people have not taken up the option to for a bank holiday. Very interesting. I was actually rung up by my bank manager who said, Pete, we're more than willing to give you a bank holiday. I said, no, I'm all right. My work situation hasn't changed. Like you, none of my tenants have asked for a reduction in rent. So for me, it's almost business as normal. So I'm just happy to keep going as I am. And it looks like that's the same for most of the investors that responded to the survey.
And then we went into, what sort of buffers have you got in place and how well can you survive those? I think, if we looked at the next 3 months, we have around sort of 20%, 22% of people saying that they've got enough buffer to cover them for three or so months. Then the remainder of that is basically, sort of almost 80% of the respondents are basically saying, I'm good for at least 3 to 6 months, right through to greater than 2 years. And the big numbers, the sort of 6 to 12 months, 20%, 12 months to 2 year buffer, 17%, and then greater than 2 years buffer, 21% of people. So that is material numbers that are basically telling us that they're okay in managing their finances. And then question number 11, which was always one of the most interesting questions. I was looking for the responses. What sort of results did we get from asking about the pandemic? And as a property investor, has your tenant asked for any rental relief? What sort of responses did we get there, Pete?
So 4 out of 5 or 80% said they didn't get any response from their tenants about any relief, which means that there were 20% that asked for some sort of relief. But interestingly, and I'm sure the case is the same around the States, that it's one thing for a tenant to ask for relief, but you have to prove hardship. So there is paperwork that you need to present if there is a dispute to show that, yes, I'm in hardship, I would like a reduction in rent, not just taking advantage of the situation and saying, oh, please, I would like some rent relief. And
I think this is a really important point because it moves into question 12, right? So we had 1,877 responses to question 11. Now, question 12 was, if you had been asked, what did you agree to following that? And we had effectively 21% saying they had a permanent rent reduction, 22% said that they were going to do a deferral. But what was interesting in terms of there was a question here for other. Now, we got 48% responses to that. So probably said to us that we needed to have a few more response rates there. But a few people didn't quite understand the question correctly in terms of skip this question if you hadn't been, because we had a lot of not applicable who were just saying, look, this isn't affecting me, but they needed to just skip the question, but they didn't. But so we had landlords helping tenants. There was 81 responses of the 522 people who answered that. So there was 254 people who wrote us, please specify. Well, 81 of those people, of those 254, said we helped our tenant out in some way, shape or form. And what was interesting, of those 254 responses, 39% of them basically said the tenant was just trying their luck. Once we asked for that, as you were saying before, once we asked for them to clarify their hardship, they just stopped their inquiries. So I think that's also interesting. In terms of, we obviously, there's always on the fringes of both sides, landlords behaving badly who were just not refusing to help their tenants out. And then we also asked around whether tenants behaving badly. And so question 13 is, has any of your tenants refused to pay rent? Good news story there. Only less than 5% of people basically said yes, their tenants are refusing to pay rent, and 95% have no problems here. So it's always those margins that make it difficult, both on the landlord side and also the tenant side. So we think that that's also important. In terms of the blends, that'll all be there for you, but we got a really nice consistency in New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland were the highest states respondents. In terms of age ranges, the majority of them were in that sweet spot of 26 to 55. So that's consistent with most property investors in that age bracket. And then the income ranges spread from sort of as low as under 50,000 right through to people who are over 300,000. And still, even though it was a blind survey and an anonymous survey, we still had 8% of people who don't want to talk about how much income they earn. So that's pretty consistent with people thinking that money's a taboo topic to talk to. So, Pete, how would you summarise, your observation of the survey?
Well, I was very pleasantly surprised, Ben. Admittedly, I was quite nervous late March and early April. I did think for a minute there that the sky might fall in.
Yep.
But when you had the time to take some deep breaths and realise that there are all these other initiatives in place, like mortgage holidays, state governments in particular came to the party and put some rules and regulations and guidelines in place. And as a reflection, I'm just one investor and you're just one investor, but I speak to my property manager who manages well over 100 properties, and she says that there's only 5% of the properties in their portfolio where tenants have asked for some sort of rent relief or they had some hardship, which reflects almost perfectly what we found in the survey.
And it goes back to the point, the Reserve Governor and the government said whatever it takes to get us through and to create this bridge. And so when you got through the panic components and we're back to calm, we're starting to see that in consumer sentiment surveys starting to obviously improve. Optimism is now starting to appear. We can see the other side of it. We're not going to get there easily. We won't return to the full 100% capacity that our economy can run at, but it's most likely that we'll get around 80 to 85% of that. But that last mile is going to take some time to get to, especially in the retail, tourism, hospitality sectors until we have a vaccine. But it just shows that more broadly speaking, there's a lot of optimism in regards to the property market, and that's what we wanted to reflect there in terms of what our investors also think. So it was a timely survey, and it sort of bodes well for that story. So thank you, Peter. I really appreciate your insights. in regards to sharing that with us and sort of teaming up to put that survey together and getting it out to our communities and getting those results, which I think are going to be important results, which I'm sure will be of interest to everyone who reads them.
Well, there you go, folks. The property professor, PETER KOULIZOS, he's always generous with his time coming on to the Property Couch. We got a number of things from today's chat, Pete. Clearly your views on the pandemic and how that affects property. We clearly got your top 5. Number 1, listen to Dad. 2, buy old places. 3, buy land. 4, save your money. And 5, buy sooner rather than later, which I think will help a lot of people that are listening. And clearly we got the benefit of having 2 of the heavy hitters in the industry, in both you and Ben, discussing a survey that gets to really get a bit of a heartbeat of what people are thinking about property during this pandemic time. So, mate, we certainly appreciate your time coming on to the Property Couch, and we look forward to the opportunity to have you on again.
Excellent. Hopefully next time it'll be face to face.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Back to normal.
Back to normal.
Hey, Ben, until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
Well said, mate. See you next week, folks.
Hey there, folks. Bryce Holdaway here. Before you go, if you're new to our community and only listen to maybe a handful of episodes, I thoroughly recommend that you go all the way back to episode number 1, where we unpack all of the foundations when it comes to property investing. Now, for those of you that might be a little bit time poor, I've got good news for you. We have a binge guide that you can download straight away, which summarizes the first 20 episodes where Ben and I unpack the foundational pillars of the A, B, C, D, and so much more. And you can get that straight away. If you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20, you can download it and consume it whenever you want. It's completely free and available now. And for those of you, just a quick reminder that nothing we've spoken about today constitutes financial advice. We recommend that you reach out to your licensed professional advisor so that you can look at your unique circumstances before acting on any information. Now don't forget, go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20 and get your binge guide today.